Howdy, I'm Nolan Gray, your friendly neighborhood city planner, research director at California YIMBY, and one of the co-leads of the new Metropolitan Abundance Project. Welcome back to the Abundance Podcast. In this episode, I chat with Colin Parent. Colin is a council member of the La Mesa City Council, and he's running for the California State Assembly, 79th District, down there in San Diego and surrounding areas. In this episode, we chat about his range of experiences in local government and at places like HCD, California's Housing Authority. We chat about being a pro-housing council member, interactions with the California Coastal Commission, as well as his vision for state housing policy. In this episode, we're joined by Eckhouse, California YIMBY, and Gloria Magallanes, who is the project manager for the Metropolitan Abundance Project. So bringing in some new faces. As always, please like, subscribe, leave a review. We're particularly keen to hear from you all about who you want to hear in the future. With that, on to the show. Colin Parent, thanks for joining the Abundance Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Where to even start? I feel like you're a little bit of a Johnny Appleseed around the sort of California experience with housing. But right now you're serving on the City Council of La Mesa, California. As YIMBYs, we're always hearing, oh, it's impossible for local elected officials to be pro-housing because it's all the crazy NIMBYs showing up at everything. And yet cool things seem to be happening down the coast. I'm in LA. Talk about that experience. What's it like being a pro-housing council member?
Yeah, well, it definitely has its challenges. I'm a pro-housing person. You know, I vote for all the housing. You know, as a candidate, as an elected official, and have a pro-housing message when I talk to voters. You know, in my prior elections to the city council and the current one that I'm running in for the 79th Assembly District. And I think most people are receptive to that. Most people want to hear that and think that there's a housing crisis, and they actually want to see people do something about it. But it's also true that not everyone feels the same way, right? And having that perspective, giving voice to that perspective in public life means you gotta endure a lot of pushback from people, and some of it's thoughtful and polite, and but you know, not all of it is, and that can be tough because it's people can get very mean about this. And I think the other biggest challenge is it's also like, even though like I'm very committed to housing, it's very difficult to keep my colleagues as on the city council, you know, equally committed when they're seeing the same kind of pushback that I'm seeing.
Like, I'd like to hear more about that. Like, I guess about what it's like to, I guess, try to keep your colleagues engaged like that.
Yeah, so it's tough. So I think, you know, I think one of the biggest factors that's at play for especially small local elected officials is that there isn't a lot of feedback on the work that they're doing, right? So there's not a big, robust local media. There's not the big newspaper or television stations don't cover our city council meetings the same way they do for the city of San Diego or for the county of San Diego even. And so the feedback that local elected officials get is very oftentimes limited to their own personal circles. It's limited to the few people who show up to a city council meeting and speak in public comment. And it's to those people who decide to spend a lot of their time commenting on Nextdoor or on social media accounts, right? And those are just like not that many people, right? And I'm also describing a type of person who is unusual. Right. So my city in my city in La Mesa is 60,000 people. We're about 10 miles east of downtown San Diego. And there's probably 30 people who routinely communicate to the council about issues. And they're just, and we should, you know, appreciate their comments and, you know, try, you know, listen to them. They're as part of democracy. But those are not representative, right? They're like a very unusual person who chooses to be very involved in this. Just as city council members are pretty unusual too. Like most people don't choose to do this, right? And so given that it's very tempting to look at the people who show up who oftentimes are oppositional to housing, right? Who are against change, who are not as concerned about housing affordability as I am and as you are, to think that their views on these matters are representative of the broader public. But if you're being really thoughtful and trying to look beyond that, so you read the polling, you see what the news covers, you see what people talk to you about at the door when you're going door to door. Housing affordability is actually really important. People really want you to do things on that. But if you're just listening, if you're just passively taking in the limited feedback that you get as a local elected official, you might not see that. And so that's part of my challenge is with my colleagues is to try to make sure that they understand that some of the stuff that they're hearing in a hearing room may not be representative of the public's perspective. And it's just hard. It doesn't always work.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I mean, you in different capacities spend a lot of time talking with people in different offices, your council colleagues, you have an advocacy life. Like, what do you find to be most effective in swaying them?
The most effective thing is asking them to follow the state laws, right? And so this is, I think, why so much of the advocacy that is happening by California YIMBY, by organizations like the one that I run, is on state legislation is so important, because there are some cities who will oppose state law, right, and will fight it tooth and nail and will litigate over it. We have some of that in San Diego, and Encinitas has a history of that. Coronado, is doing some of that even right now, and then you do have some other ones that are, like the city of San Diego, city of Sacramento, that are really trying to go above and beyond and allow for more housing. But the vast majority of cities and local jurisdictions in California, I think of as really kind of in this middle ground, where and this is true for the elected officials and what they choose to do too, is that they got some mixed feelings about housing, right? They're, the people they know are mostly homeowners. The people they know are concerned about changes in their neighborhoods. They have some, but they kind of understand conceptually that we need more housing. It's hard to vote the right way. But they are willing to follow the law. And they are not interested in getting sued by the attorney general. They're not interested in having these big, ugly, fights about, trying to reimagine the structure of government in California. They're like, well, the law says this is a bonus project. It's building the affordable units. We are obligated to vote for it. So I guess we're going to hold our noses and vote for it. Not necessarily excited about it. They may tell the members of the public that they wish they didn't have to do this, but to their credit, they took an oath to uphold the Constitution and to follow the laws of California, and they're going to do it. And so I found that the best way to get my colleagues to vote the right way is to try to have projects that are subject to the Housing Accountability Act or the state density bonus law or some of these other provisions. And to be able to say, listen, guys, like, I'm not asking you to like this. I'm not asking you to celebrate this, but I am asking you to follow your obligations under the law and do the right thing. And in my jurisdiction, almost all of my colleagues will do that. And I think that's true in a lot of other places too. And so sometimes you're trying to win hearts and minds, and sometimes it's really just trying to get people to, it's actually easier just to get them to agree to follow the law.
Well, and so you're running for state assembly now, and I think if you're successful, your success in policymaking is really going to depend on how do we have state interventions that actually are effective, right? I mean, one of the challenges with this space, which you're kind of getting at, is that we pass these laws and they really do depend to a certain degree on local good faith implementation. And yeah, you have your outstanding jurisdictions. You have your jurisdictions like Huntington Beach that are, just like, we are not following law, period. Try us, right? But you're exactly right. I think you have this large middle pack. As you think about how the state can be effective, and this is something we puzzle over at California YIMBY all the time, what are some heuristics or insights that you've gained from being a local elected official that would influence how you approach state policy?
Yeah, I think that, I think a big part of it is recognizing that not all of the jurisdictions in California are the city and county of San Francisco, right? And I think a lot of the YIMBY movement, the YIMBY movement started there, and it's like a lot of the funding and leadership is there, and like I don't want to poo-poo their efforts. And
I think you're talking to an Angelino and a San Diego resident, right? I mean,
right? Yes,
Aaron,
absolutely.
please turn your camera off. Yes.
Somebody should tell the good people of San Francisco that there's a world that exists outside their borders.
Right. And they do actually have like very distinct challenges, right? But the solutions that may be the most useful in that very unusual, very extreme context may not be the ones that we need for other places, right? And so, most people in California live in a fairly suburban environment, right? And like my city, like we're a suburb of the city of San Diego. It's, we do have some taller buildings, but not too many. And our apartment buildings are, 4 and 5 stories, at the most usually, right? And that's true for like lots of California. And that's true of where a lot of the market demand is and where a lot of the what people do. And so we should be looking toward policy changes that can have a positive impact in these kinds of areas that are relatively palatable for those places, that we can not only get them through the legislature, but can imagine local elected officials being willing to implement them in good faith and not feeling like they have this sort of historic fight that they have to take up to protect every element of their community, right? So maybe the county of San Francisco needs some policy to allow for big 20-story buildings, in lots of places where they're not allowed today. Okay, makes sense. But even if you allowed or required that in other contexts, like no one would even build it. So even if you were allowed to, it just like doesn't make any financial sense. So like, why are you trying to fight for that in places that it's not going to be used? So I think some good counterexamples are like, the ADU policies that have been used a lot in my city and in the San Diego area, making sure that, that's pretty relatively minor, right? But it can be used on broad numbers of properties. Housing bonus programs that allow for a project to go from, 30 units to 50 units or something like that. I mean, those are relatively small, but in aggregate, if used across multiple projects over time, can make a big difference. And so I think, not to say that we can't look at those hard cases like San Francisco or some of the hard challenges in the city of Los Angeles, but let's also not forget that most of California isn't those places, and that we should come up with policies that are going to be useful in the broad majority of the state.
Yeah, you also bring to this work some experience working at HCD, which is also at the front lines of actually implementing some of this at the state level. Could you say more about that and the experience there? I mean, that was under Jerry Brown, right?
Yeah. So I worked for Jerry Brown's gubernatorial campaign in 2010. And so I got appointed to go work as his director of external affairs at the Department of Housing and Community Development for the first 2 years of his administration. And because Jerry Brown is extremely frugal, he also didn't appoint a communications director. So I was the spokesperson for the department for a couple of years, and got to do some regulatory and housing policy stuff a little bit on the side, although it ended up taking up a lot of my time. At the time, this was for like the YIMBY movement is sort of came. The modern YIMBY movement came after I served there, right? So this might be a surprise to people, but at the time, I joined in like the July of his first year, and he had just cut in half the housing development department. And because he didn't like them, he didn't like housing element law, he thought he was being treated unfairly as the mayor of Oakland. And it was just sort of, he was not interested in housing, and especially not in like that division of the department. And then fast forward today, of course, and like that's the place where the most growth in the department. The housing element process has been reinvigorated. There's a lot of the housing accountability stuff that's happening through the department is through that division. And so it's changed a lot. But I will say at the time, the first time I ever saw the term YIMBY was like some handmade decorations that people had put on their cubicles in that housing development department. They were the original YIMBYs, right? Where they were really felt like they were the vanguard of pro housing and pro housing supply, right? And that's not always like their reputation now, right? And there's been some tension between the sort of the folks at HCD, some of the older line folks and some of the modern YIMBY movement on that housing supply question. But like back then, no one was for housing supply in a big real way, except for them, even if it wasn't maybe as robust as we might think of the modern YIMBY movement. So that was really interesting. And I think the other big thing is that it just, for me, like I came to that department not because of my expertise on housing policy, but rather through my political relationships with Jerry Brown and his organization. And so I was able to experience, to learn a lot about the nuts and bolts of policymaking, learn a lot about the mechanics of the department and state agencies, but also coming with a clear eye on the politics of it and understanding what was possible, what wasn't, what the governor cared about and didn't care about. And I think that really helped me get a better sense of that interaction between policy and politics. Right, we have all great ideas about if we could snap our fingers and change policy, the world would look a lot different. But the reality is, there's like politics involved, and I got a real strong view of that at the department.
It's a very interesting time. I mean, you have seen then, I guess, a very interesting evolution in the role of HCD. I think you pointed to there's a lot of political cross pressures on the department now, YIMBYs who want them to be stronger, mayors like Jerry Brown who feel that HCD is being very hard on them. Do you think there's a role for the legislature in helping HCD navigate that to be more effective?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and honestly, I think the biggest thing is that I think the legislature should stand up for HCD. Like I think HCD, especially in the last under this leadership and under the prior director, have done I think a really great job of bringing the department into a modern place, being advocates for more homes, helping to implement state legislation, and challenging cities who are trying to get out of their obligations. Not that everything's perfect, that's fine, but they are absolutely an ally. And there's going to be a temptation by members of the legislature to push back on them, to defend their jurisdictions in their own communities, in their own districts, which I understand. But I don't think that's what the legislature's role should be. Instead, the legislature should say, "Listen, we're passing laws. We're trying to make things happen. HCD and the attorney general and some private litigants are really the backstop on those things, and we need to be defending them, funding them, empowering them to be able to help the bills that the legislature passes actually result into more homes. And that's going to be politically challenging sometimes, but that's okay. I think that's what they ought to do.
Totally not just fishing for bill ideas here, but in terms of stuff you're excited to work on housing, should you win in November, what's top of mind for you? What gets you up in the morning on housing?
Yeah, so I have like a long list of ideas, right? And every time I come up with an idea, I write it down in a little folder that I have, and I try not to think about it until after the election. So I'm focused.
All good YIMBYs have the Google Doc somewhere where it's like, this seems like a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I have some concepts of a plan, right, on some of these things, as opposed to well worked out issue papers. But I'll give you a couple of the examples of things that I want to work on, right? So, we have I've done a variety of things to help enhance the state housing bonus program, right? So if you build a little bit of affordable units in your project, you can build a project that's a little bit bigger and cut through some of the other regulatory barriers. I think that's been really great. We expanded that in 2016 in San Diego, in 2020 statewide, and then again in 2023 with an even bigger enhancement. I think that's been really effective. We've got some good data that shows that it works. It's all pretty much focused on the shape and size of buildings and the entitlement certainty. And it doesn't really address directly the pro formas, except insofar as you can maybe build more units and offset costs. What I think one thing I'd like to do is figure out a way to, like we do in La Mesa, like they do in Sacramento, to exempt the affordable units from some of the development impact fees that they have there, right? And some of them are probably off limits, like schools and that sort of stuff, but some of them shouldn't be. And I think what's great about that as a policy is that cities are actually not going to be harmed by this. They're actually going to end up getting more revenue than they otherwise would, because these projects are bigger than what they planned for, right? And so they're actually going to generate more fees anyway. And it addresses the pro formas of these projects. So projects that otherwise wouldn't be feasible can now be feasible because they have less on their cost side. And so I think that's something where I think a lot of what we've been doing is housing advocates have been really focused on the entitlement and the size of projects, but I think we also need to take more into account the pro forma side of this equation, and so making sure that the financing of more of these projects are viable.
Yeah, the impact fee piece is so tough. I mean, it's something that we've been working on, and of course they're incredibly high. I think I'm actually on the end of the spectrum among YIMBYs where it's like, I'm somewhat actually sympathetic. A lot of jurisdictions actually charge impact fees and then allow housing, and we've kind of put local jurisdictions in kind of a no-win scenario with things like Prop 13. But it's such a difficult, because then you have the obvious bad actors of like the, $75,000 parks fee, yada, 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 where you're like, guys, okay. Like we have a housing crisis, not a parks access crisis. And
yeah,
getting the balance
Nolan,
right.
Nolan, to that point, I'll just add, like I raise that tension all the time when people talk about that, and I say, listen, I've talked to a whole bunch of people who are planning to leave my city or leave the San Diego area because housing is too expensive, and I really believe in parks and we should fund them, but I've never met someone who says that they're going to leave the city because they don't have enough park access. That has never happened. Right. And so parks absolutely are important. We need to fund them, but I think we also need to be realistic about what priorities are for people. Right.
Yeah. Not to pick on that because I dislike parks, but those are some of the craziest high fees,
Sure.
of all the things we charge for. Parks is like, yeah, I'm cool. All right, let's do that. But
yeah.
The costs are so high. Yeah. I want to pick your brain a little bit, maybe take stepping back to a local level here of all the cool things that are happening in San Diego County. It strikes me that of all the parts of the state where actually there's a lot of exciting local leadership, a lot of the cities in San Diego County seem to be leading on this, including San Diego and La Mesa. What's going on? What's exciting? What are some of the success stories that you would like to share? Yeah,
so I think one of the biggest things about why we've had successes in the San Diego region, both in the city of San Diego and in La Mesa, although maybe maybe San Diego's I think been a bigger leader on this, frankly, is there's been an embrace of citywide policies, right? So much of the history of San Diego and other locations are, hey, we have this in San Diego. We have this general plan that was adopted 20 years ago or something called the City of Villages strategy, and the idea was that we were gonna allow for more housing and development near transportation infrastructure, and we were just going to do that. We're going to do that, but we're going to do that through every couple of years. We'll do update a community plan, of which there's about 50 in the city. And we're going to update these, and then we're going to add more capacity, and that's going to allow for more growth over time. And for the most part, that just didn't happen, right? And that they would update the plans, or they would take forever to update the plans. And when they updated the plans, they were mostly status quo, and they didn't really make those changes. We had a similar thing in our climate action plan. The city of San Diego says, hey, we're going to achieve our climate reduction goals by allowing for more homes near transit. And we're going to achieve that by updating our community plans on a periodic basis to allow for that. And then like a couple of years went by, the next couple of community plans didn't really do that, right? They were mostly status quo documents. And there's some exceptions, and they've gotten a little better in the interim to their credit. One of the things when we advocated for and successfully got the Affordable Homes Bonus Program, which is the local City of San Diego enhancement to density bonus law, they got it up from a 35% bonus to a 50% bonus. That was a citywide policy, right? And so we didn't pick and choose neighborhoods. We didn't make have winners and losers. We just said we all agree that we need more housing. We all agree that we need more affordable units. We're gonna apply this citywide. So if anyone wants to build on multifamily zone property and they're willing to give some affordable units, they can build bigger. And as an impact, we upzoned the city of San Diego by 11% overnight. One vote, right? And and it had a lot of impact. People started using it, and it was effective. But then I think that if you look at some of the things that came out from the mayor's administration and the current mayor's administration, their big housing policy efforts are these citywide policies, right? Whether they're making it easier to build ADUs, making it easier to build their complete communities program, some of the fee reforms, they've all been applied citywide, and they've all happened at once, as opposed to doing it neighborhood by neighborhood. And I think that's been effective. And it's been not only effective in terms of you're seeing more units being produced, you certainly are, but it's a better political economy. It's actually easier to get those things adopted than doing these neighborhood level ones. And I think that's been a game changer. And I know you guys had Bill Fulton on the pod, and Bill's a friend, and know him from his time in San Diego. My theory on the citywide housing policy is kind of born in part because through his experience when he was the planning director in San Diego, he recognized that our community plan update system wasn't working, and so his innovation was, well, if the community planning plans are hard to update, why don't we just update the segment of the community plans near transit? It'll be smaller, we can get our hands around it, and it'll be able to get that done easier. But the effect was actually the opposite. People came unglued when that was being proposed, right? And I think it's a dynamic that you see commonly in land use politics, and I think developers are very familiar with this, is that the smaller the geographic area around which you make dispositive policy, the more difficult it gets, because people get the more angry about it. And so if that's the best example is an individual project, right? That's where people are the most engaged and the most resistant. And so if that's the dynamic, then try to do it on a broader geography, right? So instead of doing a station area plan, do a community plan. Instead of doing a community plan, do it citywide. If you can do it through statewide legislation, that's even better, right? And so I think that understanding that dynamic, I think helps explain what we ought to be focused on as advocates, and also and policymakers for that matter. And I think is as part of the explanation for why the city of San Diego and the San Diego region has been a leader on these issues.
Yeah, I think that's some of the core logic that motivated California YIMBY in pursuing state legislation, is this idea that the politics would be easier. I had somebody tell me once, well, every city in California has a clear consensus on where affordable housing should go, somewhere else. Yep. And, when you're talking at a small enough scale, there's a lot more somewhere else than there is here. And as you get up to a larger scale, you run out of somewhere else's. And the choice becomes a little clearer, right? About, well, are we doing this or not?
Yeah. And I think, I honestly think that this makes intuitive sense to voters too, right? You're telling people, hey, we're not singling you out. We're not picking on your neighborhood, right? We all agree. Like if you ask voters, they may prefer to have stuff happen in someone else's backyard. Sure. Like there's definitely plenty of that. But even people who say that do tend to agree broadly that we need more homes, right? And so you say, listen, we need more homes. We're going to allow for it, but you're not going to be singled out. Your neighborhood's not going to be singled out. Like, there might be something that you might have some hesitation around, but you don't have to feel like you're the only one carrying that burden. That we're all in this together, and that we're going to try to solve this for everybody. And I think that just has a lot more appeal to people, even people who are a little more concerned and skeptical about all this than otherwise.
Were there any, I guess, difficulties in making that shift? Because I really like the article that you sent on this topic, and in it you mentioned how, or I guess the author mentioned how that approach was really different from how planning is typically done. So were there any challenges in, I guess, shifting to that perspective or approach?
Oh yeah, I mean, people hadn't ever done that before, at least at least in San Diego, or at least on such a scale. And one of the big challenges, Gloria, I think, was trying to get people to think that this was a possibility, right? That there was a different way to go about this. I think there's a lot of people who are so the way this all came out for the enhanced bonus program in the city of San Diego. I was then the director of policy at the San Diego Housing Commission, which is both the public housing authority in the city of San Diego and more or less the Department of Housing for the city. And so I was their policy director, and I convened a working group of kind of the big players in housing in the region to try to talk to them about a policy idea about the density bonus enhancement. And a lot of these people have been at their jobs for a long time, and they had a way of doing things. And their idea of what the fights were about this, community plan updates. And I was like, well, maybe this is really hard. It doesn't seem to be working. Why don't we try this other thing? And it was, I think, part of the challenge was just getting people to just sort of accept that there was even a possibility to engage in it. And but the more conversations we had, the more kind of people were said, okay, I guess we can do it. The other thing that was really helpful about getting it across the finish line to kind of address that issue too is we had this really broad cross-partisan coalition, right? So we had the climate action campaign, my organization that I run, Circulate San Diego, pretty progressive oriented, climate change concerned organizations. And we were partnering with the Building Industry Association and some of the realtor groups and the Chamber of Commerce. And we had a couple of meetings where we would show up, all of our coalition partners would show up to meet with the city council member, and they thought we were punking them. They're like, what are you guys doing here together? Like, you guys are always fighting each other. I'm like, yeah, but we all agree on this. We all need more housing, and we all think it should be, it should include some affordable and all that. And so that was one of the ways we kind of broke through that and tried to get people to realize this is something that could happen, and there was political support for it as well.
You run a group that we love at California YIMBY, Circulate San Diego, Circulate SD. You guys do a lot of good work on housing, but also on transit. And I think most people listening to this are fully bought in that these are two sides of the same coin. But you want to tell us a little bit about Circulate San Diego and what you guys do down there?
Yeah, so Circulate, we're a small nonprofit. We've got 9 employees right now. We're actually celebrating our 25th year. And we were the result of a merger of Move San Diego, which was primarily focused around transit, and Walk San Diego, which, as you might imagine, was pedestrian advocacy. And now, with our forces combined, we are focused on public transit, safe streets, just like crosswalks, bike lanes, that sort of thing, Vision Zero, and sustainable growth, which for us means housing abundance, affordable housing, transit-oriented development. And if you Google us, the stuff that you'll find is the same stuff that California YIMBY knows about and engages with us on. It's our research, our public policy advocacy, bills that we sponsor. But the bulk of our budget and staff is actually on fee-for-service engagement. And so we do safe routes to school plans, we do pedestrian master plans, we do community engagement for all sorts of different, almost exclusively public agencies. And so I'm not a planner, but I employ a bunch of planners and do planning work and run an organization that does a lot of planning work. And what's great about that mix is that we have, me and my policy council. We're kind of like these wonky lawyer guys, but we really don't know anything about planning, or at least we're trained formally, right? And we get to rely on our colleagues who are doing the day-to-day planning engagement work, talking to regular folks, and bringing a valuable perspective to the work that we do. And we do, I think the thing that we're probably, some of the things that we're really focused on and known for is we put out pretty detailed, well-researched policy recommendations. And then we fight very doggedly, especially in the press, to make sure that the people who are in charge for fixing the problems that we identify fix them. Even if they don't necessarily follow our recommendations, as long as they fix them, that's good. And I think we've developed a real strong reputation, both locally and now statewide, that when we're saying something, it matters. People ought to listen, and that we're not just swinging at every pitch. And that if we're making an ask for something, boy, it's not going to be our last ask. It's not going to be the last time you hear from us. And it's been pretty effective. We've been getting a city to City of San Diego to build a lot more safe intersections, bike lanes, adopting a variety of housing policies, and recently in the last few years sponsoring some pretty impactful legislation.
I'd imagine a lot of people listening to this are involved in local YIMBY groups or housing or transportation advocacy groups, looking at what you all have in San Diego and thinking, wow, like that's the dream. What advice would you give for sort of some of these more upstart, mostly probably volunteer groups to actually grow into something professional and institutional in all the best ways and have the type of influence you all have down there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, and the reality is that, you know, we're celebrating our 25th year. I've only been at the organization for 10. And I think some of the most important things that we've done to institutionalize ourselves happened before me, and I can't take credit for that, right? So Walk San Diego, for example, you know, started out as just like a couple of guys mad about some sidewalks, and they did a press conference and said, hey, y'all should fix these sidewalks, and like people showed up and they're like, okay, I guess we're doing something. And then a few years later, they were kind of doing this volunteer advocacy. Someone at the county of San Diego said, hey, you know, we actually have this grant program. Do you want to like maybe get paid to do some of this stuff? And they said, okay, I guess. And then they ended up building up a portfolio of business to do this kind of work on behalf of local governments. And I think, and our organization's history is not alone in that. There's actually a lot of the pedestrian advocacy and bike advocacy organizations nationwide who have that as a part of their funding model, where they've taken their expertise that they've developed as advocates and figured out a way to actually get paid for it as planners and engagement specialists. And so I think that's something that folks should think about when they're doing this work. It's probably easier to do it on the transportation side than the housing side, because there's more funding available for those sorts of things. But I would just encourage people not to shy away from it. It's like some people, I've talked to people, they're like, oh, they're afraid it's selling out and that sort of stuff. And like, okay, I appreciate that, but like, we wanted to advocate for and my predecessors wanted to advocate for more crosswalks. If the county of San Diego wanted to give us some funding to advocate for more crosswalks, that sounds good to me, and allowed us to be able to be more effective at that. And so I think figuring out that the business model really does matter. It's very difficult to hire staff just on individual donations on your website. You got to figure out other sorts of things. And I think also the sort of related to that too is be open to working on several different related issue domains, right? And so if you're a housing group that you're partnering all the time with your local bicycle coalition, I don't know, talk about maybe joining forces, and maybe there's ways to generate that scale so that you can do even more and more impressive work.
Cool. Do we want to do lightning round? Yes. Cool. Okay, let's do it.
Sure.
Where are the best fish tacos in San Diego County?
Ooh, there's no such thing as the best. There's only your favorite. But I think my favorite right now is the Mariscos Guermon truck that's right next to my campaign office in City Heights. I used to go to it when it was in a dirt lot in front of a liquor store, and now it's in a paved lot next to a U-Haul truck storage facility. And they have the smoked marlin taco, which is magnificent. And if you come to San Diego, you gotta try it.
I love City Heights. What's your favorite beach to go to?
Probably La Jolla Shores, but I'm more of an inland guy, so I have a T-shirt actually that says "Barely See the Beach" in it. It's a little clothing brand from based out of Spring Valley. Does that? So I go to the beach. It's great, but I'm mostly inland.
Yeah, when you move to California, right, they make you decide, are you going to be a beach person or a mountain person? Once you choose, you never go back, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What's your favorite building in San Diego County?
It's got to be in La Mesa. It's probably my friend April's house that I've only seen from the outside, and it's beautiful. She bought it a few years ago, and every time I walk by it, they're making new things to it, and they've got like 2 ADUs in it now. So, Geisel Library is a good one too if you want to see something fun and interesting. that's findable on Google Maps. It's on the UCSC campus.
Walk, bike, bus, or train?
Yeah, I take the trolley. That's my go-to. And fortunately, I can walk to my trolley stop in the city of La Mesa, and it lets me off a couple blocks away from my office in downtown San Diego. I take the orange line, which conveniently runs through a large share of the 79th Assembly District.
Favorite missing middle typology?
Oh, that's a great question. Townhomes.
As a fellow townhomes lover, could you say more, please?
Yeah. So I think so obviously we need more housing of all types for sure, right? And more rental. We need more in the low end, more in the high end. But I think the thing that I hear the most frequently from such a diverse set of folks is people expressing a lot of concern that there isn't enough affordable for sale product. And I say this as someone who's done most of my career has been working on multifamily rental stuff, both at the Housing Commission, at the HCD, the density bonus policies that I've had a strong hand in, all on the rental side. Super important, maybe even most important, because the most folks who are the most have the most difficulty in the housing market. But where we haven't had enough real success is home ownership opportunities that are affordable. And so like fourplexes are great, sure, but we need those townhomes so that more people are able to purchase something who want to get into that. And I'm looking forward to that's definitely one of the things I want to work on in the legislature. I know Nolan, you and I have had some brief conversations about wanting to see some efforts on that. I'm not an expert on that like I am on some of these other policy issues, so I'm going to have to lean on some experts like folks on this call and in your organization. But I think that's the thing that I'm the most excited about right now in that missing middle space.
Might be your most controversial take on this podcast within the MB space. Townhomes are a divisive topic, in my experience. But
only
among the Bay Area lunatics, okay? In real America, San Diego and LA, we love them.
That's fair. It's a Santa Clara County issue. People have there's a townhome fault line.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Okay.
Well, they're I don't think I'm going to get redistricted into Santa Clara County, so I think it's fine. It's fine.
It's gonna be a really weird long ribbon.
Yeah.
YIMBY gerrymandering. We'll get there someday. Cool. So do we want to talk a little bit about the Coastal Commission? You all have done some excellent work on the Coastal Commission. I think most people, everyone in California loves the coast, even if you are a mountain Californian. It's an incredible asset. But as you all have pointed out, the California coast is incredibly expensive. The coastal designation has, in practice, been probably one of the most effective things we've done for pricing out folks from the coast. And of course, this has had a disparate racial impact as well. You all put out a report recently covering this, but also covering, I think, some useful things that we could be doing to actually improve housing affordability and access to the coast. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you think about that issue?
Yeah, so the organization I lead, Circulate San Diego, we put out a report earlier this year called A Better Coastal Commission. And the premise is sort of like you say, Nolan, like the coast is important and we all love it. And we're Californians and we're environmentalists and we want to protect the coast. And we don't want to get rid of the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission does a lot of important things. Protecting the coast is distinct. It is important. There probably ought to be some different rules around the coastal zones than in other places. Those things all make sense. But what we also need to recognize is the Coastal Commission, and through its actions in recent years, has not has been at cross purposes to a lot of the state of California's stated goals around affordability, around inclusion, and around climate change. And so what we did in this report is we identified a variety of examples where the Coastal Commission was blocking or delaying affordable housing, where they were saying no to bicycle lanes, where they were requiring cities to expand roads and to increase traffic in order to while blocking and making it harder to build infill around transit. Just stuff that just is when you say all that out loud, it just sort of like, I'm sorry, what, in California? This is the same state that's like doing all these, pro climate things and exempting bikes from CEQA and all these other sorts of things. Like, what is going on there? And so we have, like, this is not just us grousing as advocates. Like, we have to have some really concrete data from their own agenda documents that show what the staff's recommendations are on these things, and they're really just out of step with modern environmentalism and modern thinking about planning. And the part of the reason that we put this report is that we had a bill last year that Assemblymember David Alvarez, a supporter of mine for my race, we sponsored a bill with him to basically say to the Coastal Commission, hey, you need to approve housing bonus projects that include affordable units. You need to approve them just like cities and counties have to. And the Coastal Commission staff came to the legislature and said, totally unnecessary. We never cause any problems with those projects. We always approve them. Don't worry about that. This is bananas. But we looked at the numbers, like, this is just like blatantly untrue. This is just wildly untrue. But we didn't really have a stuff.
I mean, on this point too, you occasionally hear this from, I think, older guard planners. I'm a city planner, but you hear this from older planners. Oh, well, we don't need to lower the parking requirements because everybody's going to build the parking anyway. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, then what's the problem with getting rid of the mandate? Or in this case, it's like, okay, if you never cause problems for these projects, why don't we just streamline the process? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And so we was like, okay, well, that's what they're saying. We better collect some information and make sure to be able to, if we're going to do this policy again, which we have a bill this year. We tried to do that again this year. We need to make sure that we could show our work and point out that it wasn't true. But Nolan, I want to pull back on something that you said, that one of the things that I've really observed in this dialogue with Coastal Commission staff and some of the advocates who are big champions of the status quo there is that talking to them does sound like talking to a planner 10, 15 years ago, right? So it used to be that planners, like, it used to be the American Planning Association in California opposed parking reforms, right? Opposed density bonus law, while at the same time, like, featuring Donald Shoup in their magazine, right? It was just sort of like, what's going on here? This doesn't seem to be making sense. And to their credit, that organization has sort of changed their perspective and has become to embrace this, just as a lot of professional planners have kind of changed their perspective too, right? And said, okay, maybe a bespoke approach to every project isn't appropriate. We need to, adopt actual plans and live by those plans. And so in a lot of ways, it does feel like the Coastal Commission is it's not that they're distinct, but really what they are is they're just sort of stuck in an older way of thinking that doesn't value, non-car transportation, that doesn't believe in markets as contributors to housing affordability, right? And so I think a lot of this is just trying to wake up the commission as well as the legislature to understand that their older way of thinking just is no longer what modern planners and modern environmentalists are thinking about land use and transportation.
Do you feel optimistic on this? I feel like the Coastal Commission in the last year has doubled down on, don't tell us what to do, which is, I think, an arc we saw to some degree from cities, and then cities largely lost that political fight. So maybe that's what's going to happen with the Planning Commission, or with the Coastal Commission.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening, Aaron. And so, like, we had I think there's going to be change to the Coastal Commission. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be piecemeal. Part of that's going to be through legislative change, and part of that's going to be attitudinal change. I think the next governor is going to think differently about who they appoint to the Coastal Commission based on this. And I'll tell you, with my conversations with legislators, with legislative staff over the last couple of years about this issue, there's a growing frustration amongst decision makers about the obstinacy from the Coastal Commission, and even folks who aren't willing to take the step of voting for reform recognize, or the reforms that have been put before them so far, recognize that the system isn't working, that they're not following the rest of the state on climate and affordability issues, and do want to see some change. And so I think it's just a matter of time. We've got to keep up the pressure, keep on advocating, keep on proposing good reform bills. But I'm not deterred by the ferocity of their opposition. I think it's actually a signal that this is working and that the time for reform is at hand.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we had some pretty bruising fights around this with SB 423, which was essentially a streamlining bill for jurisdictions that were falling behind on their RENA production goals. And yeah, I think there was some frustration among a lot of policymakers in Sacramento of this idea of, well, why would we carve out the parts of the state where the housing crisis is most acute from this housing affordability streamlining law? And there's not really, frankly, a good answer. I mean, I think everybody would agree, okay, natural areas of the coast, definitely don't touch that. Areas subject to flooding and sea level rise risk, those were all carved out of the bill. But you're going to say a fully urbanized area, we're not going to extend streamlining provisions to those parts of the state. Doesn't really sell well.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and let's just, to drill down a little bit on the specific example of the policy that the bill that we were proposing, we didn't make it through last year, didn't make it through this year, but made a lot of progress. It almost got there. All it was saying was that the Coastal Commission should approve projects that include affordable units on land that they had already approved for multi-family development. Right? We're not talking about stuff on the beach or stuff in marshlands or stuff where the coast might erode or any of that stuff. No, like there's some parts that people don't know this, maybe people don't know this. There are parts of the coastal zones that are like zoned for housing, zoned for multifamily housing. Multifamily housing does get built in the coastal zone, occasionally gets approved by the Coastal Commission. And we're just saying for that stuff that you guys have already signed off on for affordable for multifamily housing, you should allow it. And then we're like, no, we don't want to. It's like, what? That just is so bonkers. And so, so I just don't think those, arguments that don't have any basis don't last for too long. And so I'm confident there's going to be some changes. Maybe it'll be next year, maybe it'll be the year after. I don't know, but I'm confident there's going to be some changes.
Yeah, the unique thing about this space, I think it's a good thing about this space, is a lot of folks are relatively new to this. Like a lot of YIMBY advocates, they hadn't been doing advocacy for years. A lot of people who are even active local YIMBY leaders or pro-housing or pro-transit leaders are in many cases fairly new to the space. I think you bring a valuable perspective in that you've been working on this for quite a while. What, bigger picture, you're talking to like folks who are entering the space and trying to think through housing affordability. What are some lessons that you think you've learned that you would impart on folks new to the space? Yeah,
I think the biggest one, I've certainly experienced this as an elected official and as a candidate, is that you got to remember, if you're a housing advocate, if you're listening to the Abundance podcast, you are not normal. You are an unusual person, and you have interests and values and perspectives that are not shared by everyone. And so I think it's really worth being humble about our, what policies we think we want to propose or champion, and also be realistic and sensitive and forgiving to people who may not share our perspectives about everything, right? And so I think we need dramatically more homes. We got to make it much easier to build more homes. And I think most of the people agree with me, but not everyone does. And even the people who agree with me may not agree with every solution that I think is valuable or that California YIMBY thinks is valuable. And we need to take that into account. And so, I think, California YIMBY has had a big experience with SB 50 trying to solve all housing problems, with one big vote, and it got pretty far actually, right? But also generated a lot of pushback, arguably catalyzed some of the statewide anti-housing organizations, right? And And I think that should be a lesson. Not that you can't swing through the fences ever, but that backlash is real. Other people's perspectives are real, and that we should take that into account when we figure out what we want to champion and what we want to make a priority. And also how we talk about these things, right? And how we talk about people and talk about and with people who disagree with us. So I try not, like, for example, like I try not to call people NIMBYs ever. I try not to say that word, right? Now I call them anti-housing activists if that's who they are, right? But that's a concession to folks who feel like that it's a pejorative and that doesn't necessarily describe them. Even if maybe I think it does, I try not to say that so that we can continue to be in dialogue without sort of writing one another off.
Could more pro-housing advocates run for office? And if so,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You should totally do it. You should run for office. It is challenging and difficult and rewarding. And you don't get to achieve everything that you want. You don't get to have everything that you want. You don't get all of your policies across the finish line, but you get to be in a position to move the needle, right? And so I have a hard time getting my colleagues to adopt some of the more robust things that I want to do, but there's plenty of things that I've been able to get done that if I wasn't there, it just wouldn't have happened, right? And that is a very fulfilling, rewarding thing. If you do want to run for office as a YIMBY, though, one thing that I would encourage everyone to understand is that, like, even if housing is like by far the most important thing that you care about, it's not that's not true for most voters. Most voters have a diversity of things that they care about. And so if you want to run as a pro-housing candidate, great, don't shy away from that, but also engage with the other issue areas. Make sure you have thought through your position on these other areas. Make sure that you can articulate a set of policies that you want to support and champion that are on other domains, right? And so you pro-housing, but you recognize that you need more parks in your community and you want to support a park bond. Great, that sounds great. Or if my city, we got a lot of young families. We need more bike lanes, right, around schools, right? Those are things that I talk about, right? A lot of young couples coming from downtown San Diego, they have dogs and small apartments. We need dog parks, right? At least, like, those are all things that we could do. And sometimes you see the folks in the housing space who run for office and they only talk about housing, and that's the only thing they know about, the only thing they can speak confidently about. And I'm into it. Like, I donate to them, but they don't always win elections. And so just encourage people to running a city, running for the legislature. It's a whole diversity of issues. Housing is very, very important. Maybe the most important, but it's definitely not the only one.
Yeah, you don't really have the option of opting out of certain issues when you're actually on city council. Like if it comes in front of you, you gotta make your call.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And some stuff, a lot of it's land use, but the budget, public safety, how do you feel about the police? These are all things that are that people gotta think through and have good answers for. And so it's important to know that. And you have an obligation to think critically about those things. If you're going to serve in that office, you gotta serve in the totality of that office, right? And housing may be where you spend most of your attention. Great, but you gotta do due diligence on that other stuff too, and represent your constituents honorably.
One of the benefits of, I guess, being in office is that you're able to push for things that maybe wouldn't happen if you were in the room. Is there any one action or program that you feel you're particularly proud of that wouldn't have happened if you were part of that decision?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. I think, one, we sort of talked about the state density bonus law, right? And we got one application in before we had a local implementation ordinance that we processed pretty uncontroversially, and that was good. And then subsequently, we did an implementation ordinance. And I thought that was really important. I don't think the staff was going to do it, but I thought it was really important to signal to folks in the housing development space that we were going to abide by that policy. And so we adopted that. And since then, I mean, almost every multifamily development in our city in the last 6-7 years has included affordable units because of that. We don't even have an inclusionary obligation, but we're generating literally a historic number of affordable units in our city because we were very clear with people that we were going to abide by this law. And I actually, because of my background working on issues at the city of San Diego and at the Housing Commission, I actually brought in an example of a staff report from the city of San Diego that I thought really clearly articulated what the council's obligations and constraints were. And it got our staff to use that as a template so that my colleagues could see something that was clear and made sense, so that they knew what they had to do in terms of approving eligible projects. And that just wouldn't have happened if I wasn't on the council, right? It just wouldn't have happened. Another example, we just broke ground last year on the first 100% affordable development in the city 30 years. And it's a former redevelopment successor agency site. So we probably would have there would have been something done with that. But I was very insistent that we actually put it up for RFP, request for proposals, actually build something there. We had an option to sell the land and put the money somewhere else. And I just didn't, I was like, no, we have this land. It's right near the trolley. It's right near our commercial district. We should create units here and homes for people who otherwise couldn't afford to live here. And so that was a piece. And so we did that. The other thing related to that same project, we paid for an analysis about what could happen there and all that. And the analysts came back and said, listen, this can support 20% affordable, and there's no way we're going to get any tax credits, and there's no way we're going to get any bond financing. And so 20% is really the max that you can expect. And so the initial draft of the request for proposals was asking for a mixed income developer to build up to 20% affordable on that project. And because I have had some experience with affordable housing finance, which is no one else in the city does, because we hadn't done it within anyone's living memory, right? I said, no, let's not cap the number of affordables here. Let's say a minimum 20%. And then maybe some affordable housing developer will have some creative financial tool or know about some program that's not on our radar to be able to make up that gap financing. And that's actually what happened. So the proposal came in at 40% affordable. We awarded it for that. In the course of the negotiation, they were, I think CalHFA made a new program, or they figured out how to get this new program to get in there. And so now 100% of those units are going to be deed restricted. A lot of them at moderate income, right? So, but a broad diversity of income levels. And that just would never have happened if anyone else in the city was elected, because literally no one else. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who worked at the director's office at HCD in the city, in my entire city of La Mesa, right? And so, and that's just, and I feel very proud of that. But it's also it's a real substantive. I was able to bring my knowledge as a housing professional to bear on behalf of my constituents, on behalf of my community, on a very substantive policy decision. And soon there's going to be hundreds of families who are going to get to benefit from it.
Fantastic. Well, Colin, thanks so much for all the great work that you do and with your team at Circulate San Diego and down on La Mesa. And we'll be excited to see what happens depending on how things go in November. I have a very happy memory. Between jobs, after I'd committed to go to UCLA for my PhD, I did a cross-country road trip from New Orleans to San Diego, and the stars just aligned. And as I'm coming down the 8 through Alpine and La Mesa and San Diego, it was a beautiful, perfect day. And it was like the dream California experience of you've gone through a rough desert, right? And you're coming into paradise. So it's a beautiful region that's only going to get better with more housing. So where can folks follow you, stay in touch with you, get involved in whatever capacity they're interested in?
Yeah, so folks can check out my website, colinparent.org. That's 1L, and that's parent like a mom or a dad. And you can find out more about my platform, sign up to volunteer in a phone bank, make a donation, a very heavy, large donation, please. And then you can find me on all the social media platforms at Colin Parent. I'm probably most active on Twitter, but certainly you can follow me everywhere else too.
Colin Parent, thanks for joining the Abundance Podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, guys.